Ambassador Thessel, had read 12,000 pages about humans. He still did not understand them. He sat in the reading room of his diplomatic cruiser, the Pale Meridian, and scrolled through the latest batch of reports while the stars outside his window stayed perfectly still and perfectly indifferent. 40 years. That was how long he had studied humanity. 40 years of field reports, psychological profiles, historical analyses, and behavioral models, all of them stacked inside his personal database like bricks in a very tall, very confident wall. The wall, he was beginning to suspect, was built on sand. Every report said the same thing in different
Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel, Sci-Fi HFY Stories. Please don't forget, like, comment and share this video. Thank you.
ways. Human beings formed emotional bonds that made no biological sense. They protected their young with a ferocity that went far past survival instinct into something the scientific community had quietly agreed to call irrational attachment. They would sacrifice resources, safety, strategic position, and their own lives for members of their group, and not just blood relatives. Any member, any human, strangers, children they had never met. The reports filed this under a heading called Exploitable Attachment, BHAVIORS. Thessel had written 3 of those reports himself. He poured a cup of cold tea he would not drink and thought, not for the first time, that something about the heading had always bothered him. Like a stone in a shoe he kept forgetting to remove. The message came in at 3:40 station time. His communications officer flagged it immediately. A Vreth call military transmission, encrypted at the 2nd level, directed toward the nearest human relay station in the outer shell. The Pale Meridian was sitting in neutral space between the 2 territories, exactly where a conquered mediator was supposed to sit, and under conquered Treaty Thessel had the legal right to monitor all transmissions in the buffer zone. He opened it. Commander Orvek of the Vrethkal 3rd Expansion Fleet had intercepted a human colonial transport called the Meridian Cross in disputed space. 340 passengers, 60 of them children. The ship had been boarded, the passengers secured, and Commander Orvek was now listing his demands in the precise, flat language of someone who had done this before and expected it to work the same way it always had. The demands were not unusual for a mid-tier aggressive power playing leverage games with a neighbor. Release of 3 Vrethkal military officers currently held in human detention facilities. Redrawing of the outer shell border markers by 4 degrees in Vrethkal favor. Formal recognition of Vrethkal territorial claims over the Ket mining clusters. Standard calculated, surgical. Orvek had probably done the math. 17 human warships in this sector, 200 Vrethkal. The humans would bluster and posture and then negotiate. That was what the reports all said humans did. They got emotional, made noise, and then negotiated because they loved their people too much to let them die over a border dispute. Thessel read the demands twice. The stone in his shoe got heavier. He was still reading when the response came back. Not from a government office, not from the colonial authorities' diplomatic branch, a private channel, a woman's voice. Calm the way deep water is calm, not because nothing is moving, but because whatever is moving is doing it very far below the surface. This is Admiral Saren Voss of the Terran Defense Compact. I need you to release those children. You have 6 hours. After that, I am going to need you to stop existing. That was the entire message. Thessel played it again. Then he sat very still for a moment. In 40 years of diplomacy, through border skirmishes and resource wars and the 3 separate occasions where he had personally talked 2 species back from the edge of extinction-level conflict, he had developed a reliable internal alarm. It did not ring loudly. It did not produce panic. It simply made him feel, somewhere behind his second set of eyes, that the ground under his feet was no longer solid. It was ringing now. He pulled Admiral Saren Voss's military file. It was not 12,000 pages. It was 41. She had not been a particularly decorated officer in the traditional sense. No famous battles, no brilliant tactical innovations in the textbooks. What the file showed instead was a series of entries, logged across 30 years of service, that all shared one particular quality. Every single time someone had threatened people under her protection, the threat had not been neutralized. It had been removed. Not contained, not managed, removed, with the kind of completeness that did not leave much to write home about. Thessel set the file down. He opened his emergency communication line to the Vrethkal Diplomatic Corps, not the military channel. The diplomatic corps, the people who still had enough political distance from Orvek to potentially listen. He did not compose the message carefully. There was no time for careful. This is Ambassador Thessel of the Galactic Concord, writing to you in my personal capacity and with 40 years of experience studying humanity. What Commander Orvek has done today is not a negotiation. I need you to understand that it is not a negotiation. It is not a leverage operation. It is not a border dispute. Please release the children immediately. Do not wait for the 6 hours. Do not send a counteroffer. Do not escalate. Release the children and offer no provocation and pray to whatever you pray to that the woman on that audio file decides to accept it. I am begging you. He sent it. Then he looked down at his hands. All 6 of them. They were shaking. He had not expected that. Thessel had a body built for cold water and low oxygen, lean and precise, his species designed by 1,000 generations of careful survival. He did not shake. He had not shaken since the 2nd year of his career, during a hostage situation on the Vel station that had gone badly and taken 2 years of sleep from him on its way out. His hands were shaking, now the way they had shaken then. He poured the cold tea down the drain and requested a fresh cup, and thought about the word that had been sitting in the back of his mind, since he'd first heard Saren Voss's voice. Stop existing. Not I will attack you, not I will retaliate, not the usual language of military threat which always had room in it, always a small negotiable room for someone to back down. Stop existing. She said it the way a person says close the door, practical, descriptive, a thing that needed doing. Orvek and his senior staff had played the message in their command room. Thessel's intelligence feed had caught a fragment of the audio. He could hear them laughing. Relaxed laughter. The laughter of 200 warships looking at 17 and doing arithmetic they were confident about. The Vrethkal had been doing that arithmetic for 300 years of expansion. 3 centuries of pushing borders and taking leverage, and reading their neighbors' love for each other as the weakness that would always, eventually, make those neighbors fold. They were very good at the arithmetic. They had never once applied it to humans and gotten the right answer. Thessel received an automated acknowledgement from the Vrethkal Diplomatic Corps, a form response, the kind of response that meant his message had been received, logged, and set aside by someone who had more immediately pressing matters to attend to. He stared at it for a long time. Outside his window, the stars did not move. The buffer zone was quiet. 12 light minutes away, the Meridian Cross sat inside a Vrethkal military cordon with 340 people aboard, 60 of them children, all of them human, and the clock on Saren Voss's 6 hours had already started running. Thessel began writing a new document. Not a diplomatic communique, not an official report. He titled it Post-Event Analysis and started filling it in because by that point, 40 years of study, 41 pages of military file, 1 audio message, and a pair of shaking hands he already knew. He just did not know the shape of it yet. He started writing anyway. The tea, when it came, went cold again untouched. The first hour, the Vrethkal laughed. Commander Orvik sat in his command chair aboard the Sovereign Reach and dictated a counteroffer to his senior diplomatic aide. His tone was the tone of a man who had done this 14 times and watched the other side fold on 12 of them. The counteroffer was measured and reasonable and designed to look like generosity while giving nothing back that mattered. This was how it was done. You pushed, they threatened. You offered something small, they took it and called it a victory. Everyone went home. He played Saren Voss's audio message one more time. "Stop existing." His senior tactical officer said it sounded like something someone's grandmother would say when she was annoyed about the dishes. The room laughed again. Orvik smiled and approved the counteroffer for transmission. He was still smiling when the first batch of emergency messages began arriving from the Concord. Not one, not three, 17 inside the first 40 minutes from 17 different Concord member species, all of them phrased differently, all of them saying the same word underneath the polite language. "Please." Orvik's diplomatic aide flagged them and asked if he wanted to respond. Orvik told her to log them for the record and get him more coffee. He did not take the calls. In the second hour, Thessel managed to reach one Vrethkal senior advisor, a man named Drevos, who had the tired eyes of someone who had spent 30 years watching his government make decisions he could not stop. Thessel put his title aside. He put the 40 years of careful diplomatic language aside. He spoke to Drevos the way one exhausted person speaks to another when there is no time left for anything but the truth. He named events from human history, specific ones. He named the siege of Korath IV, where a single human colony ship had been taken by Korath raiders, and the Korath fleet had spent 6 months wondering why the humans kept coming back larger and angrier every time, until there were no more Korath raiders to wonder anything. He named the Delon incident, which the Concord's official records listed as a * border conflict, resulting in territorial resolution, because nobody wanted to write down what had actually happened to the Delon territorial government after they had fired on a human refugee convoy. He told Drevos, "These are not war stories. These are warning stories. Every species in the Concord knows them. We tell them the way humans tell stories about fire, not because fire is evil, but because you have to understand what it does before you stand next to it." Drevos was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said, "We have 200 warships, they have 17. Thessel said, "I know the number, please look past the number." Drevos said he would bring the concern to Commander Orvik. Thessel knew what that meant. He closed the channel and went back to his analysis document and added 2 paragraphs under the heading * failure points. The third hour was when the quiet started. He noticed it because he had been monitoring human communication channels as a matter of routine for so long that their pattern was as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. Human space was never silent. It was a civilization of 8 billion people spread across 240 colonies, all of them talking at once, trade signals and government broadcasts and personal messages, and the low constant hum of a species that had strong opinions about everything and shared those opinions constantly and at volume. In the third hour it changed. The chatter dropped, not all at once. Gradually, like a room full of people who have all just heard the same thing and are all turning to look at the same door. The trade signals kept running because they were automated, but the human voices dropped out of the channels one by one until what was left was just the automated traffic, running by itself, and underneath it a silence that had a specific quality Thessel could not name for another 2 hours. He added a note to his document, 6:23 hours. Human communication pattern change. Significant. He did not know what to add after that, so he left it and moved on. In the fourth hour, Orvik received a sensor report. His chief sensor officer, a young woman named Tarek, precise and careful, not the type to make mistakes, came to him with her tablet, and her usual expression replaced by something Orvik could not immediately identify. She said the mass shadow readings coming from the direction of human space were producing numbers that did not match any known fleet configuration. Orvek looked at the numbers. They were wrong, obviously wrong. The density values were so far outside the expected range that the equipment had to be malfunctioning. He ordered it recalibrated. Tarek said it had already been recalibrated twice. He ordered it recalibrated again. She went back to her station without saying anything else. Her face had the look of someone who has been told to recount a number they are already certain about. Outside, in the disputed space between territories, the buffer zone that had been empty for the past 6 years held its breath. In the 5th hour, Thessel received a personal message. Not official, not diplomatic. A private channel he had given Saren Voss 12 years ago at the Hellion Accords, where they had spent 3 days in adjacent rooms arguing over border language and had ended up, on the last night, sharing a meal and speaking like 2 people instead of 2 representatives. She had kept the channel number. He had not expected her to use it. Her message was 3 sentences. Ambassador, move your ships back at least 4 light years from the Vrethkal border. I'm telling you this because you were decent to us once at Hellion. What's coming is not for you. Thessel read it once. He moved his ships back 7 light years. He did not message her back. He did not know what he would have said. Thank you seemed wrong. I'm sorry seemed worse. He thought about the sound of her voice on that first recording, practical calm, describing something that needed doing, and understood that she had not sent the message because she needed anything from him. She had sent it because she remembered the meal. That, he thought, was the thing he had spent 40 years filing under the wrong heading. In the 6th hour, Tarek came back. She had recalibrated 4 times. She had cross-referenced the readings with 3 independent navigation systems, and the long-range telescope array, and the gravitational sensors that did not lie because they could not. They simply measured what was there. She stood in front of Orvek's command chair and put the final report on the screen in front of him and did not say anything at all. Orvek read the numbers. He read them again. The room had gone quiet in the way the human communication channels had gone quiet an hour earlier, not because nothing was happening, but because everyone had turned to look at the same door. What the sensors showed coming across the border of human space was not a fleet. A fleet was a number. A fleet was ships in formation, organized, counted, categorized. A fleet was something you could run the math on. This did not have a number that fit. This was every ship humanity had decided to send, and humanity had decided to send everything that moved, and it was moving now, and the math Orvek had been running for the past 6 hours. The comfortable math, the arithmetic of 200 against 17, the math he had been so confident about, that math had not been wrong exactly. It had simply been answering the wrong question. Orvek looked at the screen for a long time. He said, "Get me the human command frequency." Nobody moved immediately. They were all still looking at the door. Now he said. Tarek moved. The frequency opened. There was no static, no delay. Admiral Saren Voss was already there, already waiting, as if she had known to the minute when he would finally call. 6 hours, she said. Her voice had not changed at all. It took 4 minutes for Orvek to form a coherent thought. He stood at the main screen in his command room and watched the sensor display and counted things that should not have been there. Warships, yes, the proper ones, the ones with the right call signs and the right military designations, the ones that fit the category of asterisk threat he had been trained to assess and respond to. Those were there. But they were not the whole picture. Beside the warships came mining vessels from the asteroid belt, their cargo bays empty and their hulls carrying weapons that had been bolted on with what the sensor signatures suggested was significant speed and very little elegance. Beside those came a Terran University research ship. He recognized the class, had seen them before at diplomatic events. now broadcasting on a military channel and running at full burn. Beside that, 3 independent cargo haulers out of the outer shell colonies, civilian registry, no military rank markers, just names painted on the sides. Heron's Luck. The Myra K. Old Debts Paid. No one had ordered those ships there. The message had gone out on an open human frequency, children, Vreth Call, Meridian Cross asterisk, and those ships had heard it and turned around and come. That was what Orvik could not get his mind around. Nobody made them come, nobody called them specifically. There was no chain of command that reached into a civilian cargo hauler and pulled a pilot out of their route and pointed them at a military action. There was just the message, and then there were the ships, and the ships kept coming in a way that had nothing to do with orders and everything to do with the thing the reports had filed under the wrong heading for 200 years. Orvik finally looked away from the screen. He opened the channel to Saren Voss, and for a moment he did not say anything. He was a military commander. He had fought 7 engagements in his career, won 5 of them cleanly, and survived the other 2. He was not a man who was easily made speechless. He was speechless now. He said, "Why did they all come?" Not a tactical question, not a negotiating position. A genuine question from a man looking at something his entire life had not prepared him to see. Saren's voice came back flat and clear. They heard. But these are not military ships. These are not their fight. Commander, she said, you took a ship full of children. This is everyone's fight. He thought about the next thing to say for a long time. He said, release the children in exchange for. No. Simple word. No space around it for anything to grow. Admiral, I'm prepared to negotiate. I know you are, she said. I'm not. She gave him his last option before she stopped speaking to him as if he had choices. Release the children unharmed. Surrender his command staff for tribunal proceedings. Begin full demilitarization. He had 10 minutes to decide. Orvik looked around his command room at the faces of the people who had laughed at the grandmother's voice 6 hours ago. They were not laughing now. He thought about the 200 warships he had started this day with. He thought about the math. He thought about the 14 operations he had run before this one, all of them successful, all of them using the same basic calculation. Love is a hook, and a hook is a weakness, and a weakness is a door, and if you have a big enough force you can walk through any door you want. He had been so certain about the math. He went to war. Of course he went to war. He had 200 warships and his pride and the memory of 300 years of expansion, and the alternative was the kind of surrender that did not end careers so much as it ended everything. He gave the order and his fleet engaged, and his people fought the way soldiers fight when they know they are fighting anyway fully, and without much hope, but without the option of anything else. They fought for 3 hours. The asterisk Meridian Cross asterisk was found in the 2nd hour. A squad of Terran defense soldiers cut through the cargo bay door to find the passengers sitting on the floor in the dark, some of them sleeping, some of them crying quietly, all of them alive. The children were together in a group near the back wall, the older ones sitting close to the younger ones the way older children do when they have understood what is happening before the younger ones have. A medic named Caraway got there first. She came through the door with her kit open and her light on, and she swept the beam across the room counting, and then she stopped because she had reached 60 and all 60 were there. Near the back wall, a small girl with dark hair was sitting cross-legged on the floor. She had been drawing something in the condensation on the cold metal surface beside her with one finger, lines and shapes, a simple picture. Caraway asked her what she was drawing. The girl, whose name was Mara, said, "Home." Caraway put her hand over her mouth for a moment. She had a daughter, 8 years old, hair the same dark color. She did not say anything. She crossed the room and sat down next to Mara and put her arm around her, and turned her light off so the other children would not be frightened by the noise of the fighting still happening somewhere outside the hull. They sat like that in the dark. Outside, the math finished resolving. When it was over, Orvek was still alive. He had not expected to be. He sat in the wreckage of his command room, the screens dark, the power running on emergency backup, the sovereign reach no longer moving under its own power, and waited. The boarding party that came through his door was 6 soldiers. They were not running. They were not shouting. They moved through his ship the way someone moves through a task they have prepared for and are now simply completing. Their lead officer found Orvek in his command room and stood in front of him and said, "Commander, you're coming with us." That was all. No anger, no speech, no moment of human fury that he had always been told to expect from a species that ran on emotion. Just the work. "You're coming with us." Thessel watched it all from 7 light-years away. His long-range feeds gave him pieces and fragments, sensor data, intercepted communications, navigation records, and from those pieces he assembled a picture that he spent the rest of the night writing into his analysis document. He wrote for 6 hours without stopping. He wrote about the mining ships and the cargo haulers and the university research vessel that had shown up with experimental weapons systems installed in what the technical logs showed was 180 minutes of preparation. He wrote about the silence in the human channels in the 3rd hour, the held breath. He understood now, of a species that was not deciding whether to come, but only organizing how. He wrote about Orvek's question, why did they all come? He could not get it out of his head, because it was the question the whole galaxy had been asking about humans for 2 centuries without realizing they were asking it. Why do they love each other like that? Why do they come for strangers? Why does a cargo pilot in the outer shell turn his ship around for a child he has never met on a colonial transport he has no connection to? Thessel wrote and could not find the answer in any of his 12,000 pages of research. Then he stopped writing. He thought about the meal at the Hellion Accords, the last night. Saren Voss across a narrow table, talking about a colony she had grown up on, a place that barely had enough sun to grow food, and the way she had said offhand, not important to her, just a fact, we looked after each other. That's how it worked. Nobody had enough alone, so you looked after each other. He opened a new page in his document. He wrote, I think I have been studying the wrong thing. I have been studying human love as a feature of the individual, a personal attachment, a private weakness. It is not private, it is not individual, it is infrastructure. It is the thing the whole civilization runs on. He stopped. Read it back. Added one more line. Commander Orvek asked why they all came. The answer is, because one of them came, and humans do not let one of them come alone. The Galactic Concord held its emergency session on the 14th day. 412 representatives from 67 member species sat in the great circular chamber on Concord Station and argued for 11 hours about what had happened in the disputed territories and what, if anything, should be done about it. Thessel sat in the ethery seat and did not speak during most of it. He listened to the arguments build up on both sides like weather systems looking for somewhere to break. There were representatives who used words like asterisk disproportionate asterisk and asterisk destabilizing and precedent, and they were not wrong about the words exactly, just wrong about what the words were describing. There were others who were very quiet and very careful and phrased everything in the passive voice, which was the political language of people who understood the situation clearly, and had decided that being too specific about their understanding was not currently in their interest. Nobody was saying what everyone was thinking. What everyone was thinking was, we saw what happened. We all watched the feeds, and none of us are going to be the species that formally tells humanity that they were wrong to do it. The motion to censure the Terran Defense Compact came up at the 7-hour mark. It was introduced by a representative from a species Thessel would not name in his public documents, a mid-tier power with territorial ambitions they were now quietly reconsidering. The motion was seconded. Discussion began. 40 minutes later, someone ran the numbers on what formally censuring humanity would look like in practice. Who would enforce it? What the enforcement mechanism would be? How many ships would need to be involved and who would contribute them, and what the chain of command would look like, and what would happen if the Terran Defense Compact chose not to comply. The motion was tabled indefinitely. Nobody called for a vote. It simply stopped being discussed, the way a fire stops when the oxygen is gone. Thessel walked out of the session at the end of the 11th hour and went back to his ship and finished his analysis document. He had been working on it for 2 weeks by then. It was 83 pages. He had never written 83 pages on anything in 40 years of diplomacy. He could not stop adding to it because every time he thought he had said the thing properly, he read it back and found he had said a version of the thing that was still a little wrong, still a little too close to the old heading, the one that had filed human love under asterisk exploitable. He was trying to write the real heading. It kept resisting him. Meanwhile, the work in former Vrethkal space continued. This was the part that the early reports got wrong. The ones that came out in the first week, from news services and military analysts, and the 3 or 4 xenopolitical commentators who had spent their careers predicting human behavior and were now trying to fit what they were seeing into their existing models. Most of them expected fire. Humans, those models said, were a species of extreme emotional response. Push them past a threshold and they would respond with the same extreme emotion. Destruction, yes, but wild destruction, the kind driven by grief and fury, the kind that burned and moved on. What happened instead was organized. The Vrethkal military infrastructure was dismantled ship by ship, installation by installation, weapons cache by weapons cache. Human administrative teams landed on every major Vrethkal facility with equipment and documentation protocols, and began cataloging everything they found with the specific, patient thoroughness of people who had decided this was a job and were going to do the job correctly. The Vrethkal were not killed. Their cities were not burned. Their population was not herded or displaced. Human soldiers posted at intersections, and government buildings were polite to civilians who passed them. Some of them learned 4 words of the Vrethkal primary language within the first week. What was being removed, methodically, completely, without drama, was the capacity for military action. Every warship, disabled, boarded, towed to human processing stations. Every weapons installation, taken apart with tools, not explosives, cataloged, removed. Every government ministry that had been involved in the Meridian Cross operation, occupied by humans with filing systems and a detailed interest in records. It was, Thessel thought, the most frightening thing he had ever watched a civilization do to another one. Not because it was cruel. It was not particularly cruel. It was frightening because of what it said about asterisk capacity, because it meant humans had the option of burning everything and chose not to. Not from weakness, not from mercy exactly, from a kind of cold, clear-eyed decision about what the situation required and what it did not require, and what it would look like if they did only what was needed and stopped. This was a species that could measure the exact amount of force a situation called for, and then apply precisely that much. No more, no less. Controlled. The trial began on the 31st day. Orvek and his command staff were brought before a human military tribunal on Concord Station, a deliberate choice, neutral ground, a signal to the rest of the galaxy that what was happening was a legal proceeding and not an execution. The tribunal had 3 judges, a full prosecution team, a defense appointment for every accused, and a documentation staff of 22. It would last 11 days. On the 3rd day, Orvik sat in the defendant's chair and watched a human prosecutor named Ellison set a stack of physical documents on her table, actual paper documents, bound, tabbed, indexed, and found himself staring at the stack while she introduced the day's evidence. Humans still use paper for things that mattered. He did not know what to do with that. He filed it next to Saren Voss's flat, calm voice and Caraway sitting with his with the children in the dark, and all of it sat in a pile in his mind that he had not figured out how to sort through yet. He asked on the third day why they were doing this. Not the trial specifically, all of it. The cataloging, the documentation, the paper files, the 11-day tribunal with defense appointments for people who had taken children hostage. Ellison looked at him over her files. She said, "Because we're not animals, Commander, we're thorough." He thought about that for the rest of the day. He thought about what thoroughness meant when it was coming from a species that had just shown up with mining ships and university research vessels and cargo haulers named *Old Debts Paid. He thought about the math he had been so certain about, and how it had not been wrong, it had just been solving for a number that did not matter. He had counted the ships. He had not counted the thing behind the ships. The thing that made a cargo pilot turn around. The thing that made Caraway sit in the dark with children she had never met. The thing that made a woman with 30 years of service and 41 pages of military record say they're human as if that was the whole answer to every question. Outside the conquered station windows, in the direction that used to be Vrethkal territory, 3 species that had been quietly developing leverage operations of their own against human colonial assets were holding emergency cabinet sessions. None of those sessions were recorded officially. All of them ended the same way. The plans were canceled. Quietly, without announcement, the way you cancel something you are no longer willing to put your name on. The files were closed. In one case, a mid-level military official who had been enthusiastic about the plan 3 weeks ago requested a transfer to a domestic posting and spent the next 6 months being very interested in domestic policy. Nobody talked about why. Nobody needed to. The conquered did not pass a law. No new treaty was signed. No formal document was produced that could be quoted in future diplomatic proceedings. Something more durable than law happened instead. An understanding moved through the galaxy the way a weather system moves, not all at once, not from one source, but everywhere gradually and then everywhere at once, and afterward the air was different. You felt it in the changed quality of the silence in certain meeting rooms, in the way certain conversations that had been common 3 months ago were now not started, in the small, practical calculations that species with ambitions recalculated without announcing they were recalculating them. The understanding was this: there was a line. It had always been there. Humans had just not had occasion to show it clearly enough for the rest of the galaxy to see it. The line was the children. Touch the children and you were not dealing with a diplomatic incident, a border dispute, a leverage operation, a negotiation, or a conflict. You were dealing with the mining ships and the cargo haulers and the university research vessel and Saren Voss's flat, patient, geological voice telling you that you had 10 minutes to decide. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody needed to. Thessel, finishing his 83 pages, finally found the heading he had been looking for. He deleted the old one, exploitable attachment BHAVIORS, for the last time. He typed the new one, load-bearing architecture. He read it back. It was right, it was finally right. He saved the document and sat back in his chair and looked out at the stars for a long time, thinking about a meal in a narrow room at the Hellion Accords and a woman who had kept a private channel number for 12 years and used it once to say what's coming is not for you. He had moved 7 light-years back. He understood now that even 7 had probably been cautious. 6 months after the Meridian cross Thessel came to Earth. He had not planned to. His official itinerary had him at the Concord Border Commission for the next 3 weeks, reviewing the new territorial maps that were being drawn up where Vrethkal space used to be. Important work. The kind of careful, slow, detailed work that kept borders peaceful for decades if you did it right, and created the next generation of conflicts if you did it wrong. He left the commission on a Wednesday and booked passage to Earth without telling anyone. He needed to understand something. He had written 83 pages and still did not understand it the way he needed to. Not in his head. The head understanding had come somewhere around page 40, when he had deleted the old heading and written the new one. He understood it there. But there was another kind of understanding that lived lower than the head and had not caught up yet. He thought if he came to Earth it might help. The planet surprised him, as it always did. He had been here 9 times in 40 years, and it surprised him every time. It was not what he expected a species' homeworld to look like. It was too soft, too green, too many places where the ground had been left to do what it wanted without anyone organizing it into something useful. The ethery homeworld was clean and precise. Every surface had a purpose. Every space was maintained. Earth had parks. Enormous parks, in the middle of cities that clearly had better things to do with the space. And the parks were full of the kind of organized chaos that humans seemed to find restful. He met Saren Voss in one of those parks. She was in civilian clothes, off-duty. She sat on a bench at the edge of an open field where a group of children were playing some game that seemed to involve a great deal of running and falling down, and arguing about the rules of the running and falling down. She was watching them with the particular quality of attention that meant she was not thinking about anything else. Thessel sat beside her. She did not seem surprised to see him. She glanced at him and said, "Ambassador," the same way she would have said "good afternoon" or "it's going to rain," a simple acknowledgement of a fact. He sat with her for a while without saying anything. This was something he had learned from humans, that they sometimes needed the silence first. That arriving and immediately filling the air with words was a particular kind of rudeness that looked like eagerness and felt like pressure. On the field, a small boy fell down while running and stayed down for a moment with his face toward the sky. Another child ran over, looked at him, said something. The first boy got up. Thessel said, "I wanted to ask you something." "I know." He looked at her. "You've been writing about us for 2 months," she said. 83 pages as of last Tuesday. My office received a courtesy copy. A small pause. I read it. He felt something he could not categorize settle somewhere in his chest. He said, "Asterisk, what did you think?" She looked at the children. "I think you're close." "Close?" "You're still writing about it like it's a thing we decided to do. Like we sat down and agreed, we will be this way. We will build this infrastructure. We will make love the load-bearing thing." She shook her head, small movement. "We didn't decide, it's just what we are." He thought about how to ask the question properly. He had been rehearsing it for 6 months and still was not sure he had it right. He said, "When you sent that first message, 6 hours, stop existing, did you know humanity would come, all of them, the cargo ships, the mining vessels? Did you know they would answer?" A long pause. "The kind that had content in it." "No," she said. "Then how?" "Because I would have come anyway." She was still watching the field. "1 ship or 1,000,000 I was coming. Turns out I wasn't alone." He sat with that. On the field, 2 children were now arguing at high volume and great enthusiasm over what appeared to be a disputed boundary marker. A third child arrived to mediate and was immediately absorbed into the argument. "Don't you find that frightening?" Thessel said. "That level of collective." "Thessel," she said his name the way she had said ambassador, a fact. "It's not frightening. It's the only thing we've ever been certain of." He did not have a response to that. She let him not have one. She did not fill the silence or explain what she meant or look at him to see if he had understood. She just watched the children on the field, and the sun moved through the leaves of the trees at the edge of the park, and somewhere, a long way off, something was making noise and someone was laughing about it. He thought about the Sovereign Reach and its 200 warships. He thought about Orvek's question, why did they all come? And Saren's answer, which was not an answer at all from a military strategic standpoint and was the only possible answer from every other standpoint. Because one of them came, and humans do not let one of them come alone. He thought about cargo haulers named *Old Debts Paid, turning around in the middle of a route for children they did not know. He thought about Caraway in the dark with her light off. He stayed for an hour. Then he said goodbye, and Saren said safe travels, and he walked back through the park toward the transport station. He did not add anything to the 83 pages. He deleted the summary section. Rewrote it. The new version was 4 sentences. It had taken him 6 months and a park bench and 1 hour next to a woman watching children fall down to get to 4 sentences. But 4 was enough. 4 was exactly enough. He read them back twice and then saved the document and sent it to the full Concord Xenopolitics department with a priority flag he had never used before in 40 years. The 4 sentences said, "We have spent 2 centuries studying human emotional bonding as an exploitable weakness. I am formally retracting this assessment. What we identified as weakness is not weakness. It is the only thing about them that has never once failed to show up." 3 weeks later, Concord military academies began adding a new unit to their strategic curriculum. Different species used different titles for it. One species called it the human constant. Another called it the weight of the bond. A third, who had a gift for straightforward language, called it what happens when you forget what they are. In human military colleges, they taught it differently. No special unit. No dramatic title. They filed it under a module called *** miscalculation and used the * meridian cross * as the case study. And the central question the students were asked to write about was not how did humanity win, but what did the Vreth call fail to understand, and when, and why did they fail to correct it? The answers filled a lot of pages. The best ones were always short. In a classroom on Earth, a girl named Mara sat in a history lesson 6 months after getting home. She was 8 now. Her hair had grown out a little. She sat in the 3rd row and kept her notebook open on her desk, and sometimes drew in the margin when she thought the teacher was not watching, though the teacher always was. The history lesson that day was about the outer shell border situation and how it had been resolved. The teacher pulled up a star map on the front screen. She pointed to a region that used to have a name and now had a date stamp, and the notation conquered Administrative Zone 7. Formerly VRETHKUL territory. Some of the students leaned forward. Mara looked at the map. She had been on a ship in that space. She knew that. She was old enough to know that, to hold it as a fact she could look at from a distance. Her grandmother had come for her. A lot of people had come. There had been a medic who sat with her in the dark with her light off. She did not think about it the way the history lesson thought about it. She went back to drawing in the margin of her notebook. The same picture she had been drawing since she was 7 years old on the floor of a cargo bay in the cold dark, tracing lines with her finger in the condensation on the metal wall. Simple lines, simple shapes. Home,